I have written another article for New Eastern Outlook. It is titled New U.S. Administration, New Wonder Weapons for Ukraine. A very familiar pattern of introducing new weapons that will change the course of the war that the collective West says Ukraine is winning anyway. This is all happening under the Trump administration, continuing right where the Biden administration left off. Now, I will read this article for people who don't have the time to read it or who just prefer to hear me read it for them. I will add additional information when and if necessary, and I will show you all of the sources I cited in the article. Let us begin. The U.S. has announced plans to ship 3,350 air-launched extended range attack munition missiles, or ERAM, to Ukraine in yet another escalation amid a war the current Trump administration vowed during the 2024 U.S. presidential campaign to end in 24 hours. So we remember him saying he would end the war right away. It was started under the Biden administration. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio admits that it is a U.S. proxy war being fought against Russia, and yet it continues. It doesn't just continue, it is escalating. As another example of U.S. foreign policy continuity of agenda, the ERAM program began under the previous Biden administration and has simply been continued without interruption under the current U.S. President Donald Trump. And we know that because I remember hearing about this munition all the way back during the Biden administration. This is from the war zone. Air Force's cheap and fast to produce long-range missile is being built for Ukraine. I am pretty sure I covered this in a previous video. The date of this article is July 11th, 2024. So this was under the Biden administration that all of this began. The ERAM, which is not to be confused with the anti-air RIM-174 Standard Extended Range Active Missile, which is also called ERAM, or the SM-6. This is a missile used by naval vessels in an anti-air role. It is the actual ERAM we're talking about going to Ukraine is essentially a turbine engine powered glide bomb. A likely candidate for the arms program, because we haven't even heard which company will be manufacturing and sending them to Ukraine, but a likely candidate for the arms program is the Boeing PJDAM, which literally stands for Powered Joint Direct Attack Munition. So a JDAM is a glide bomb, is a dumb bomb with a glide kit attached to it with GPS guidance, and it will take a dumb bomb and turn it into a precision weapon. And because it glides, it has an extended range. Now Boeing is putting a jet engine on it to give it an even longer range. And some people might be asking, well, Russia has glide bombs. Why aren't they putting jet engines on their glide bombs and giving them even longer range? Well, the reason why is because Russia is able to produce proper cruise missiles with vastly greater ranges. I wouldn't say at the same price point as these ERAM missiles, whichever company makes them, but they are cheap enough where they do not need to make something like the ERAM. They can just make thousands of cruise missiles that can fly much further than the ERAM will ever be able to fly. The ERAM is similar to glide bombs the U.S. has already shipped to Ukraine in large quantities, but with a longer range expected to reach between 240 and 450 kilometers according to the war zone. That is a large difference between 240 and 450. The powered glide bomb would be used to strike much further behind Russian lines than previous Western weapons have allowed, including HIMARS, even the ATACMS, and even the various air-launched cruise missiles, and the glide bombs the U.S. has sent to Ukraine previously. The air-launched cruise missiles like Storm Shadow and the French Scalp. This could potentially have a longer range than even those, the versions that were sent to Ukraine. But this ERAM missile would have limitations. Let's talk about the hype versus the reality of this missile. Reporting on the ERAM's delivery to Ukraine has been particularly ambiguous amid flagging fortunes for Ukraine's US-sponsored and, by the way, directed army. I just want to impress upon people, again, the reality that the US is not just helping Ukraine. The US, according to this New York Times article, The Partnership, The Secret History of the War in Ukraine, the United States has military commanders, American military commanders in Germany at the top of Ukraine's armed forces chain of command. They are running the war, not Ukraine. The US is running this war through Ukraine. It is not Ukraine fighting this war with Russia, simply with the US aiding it. Very important to understand that as we go through this. Ukraine is suffering not just on the battlefield, but also from chronic weapon shortages owed to the collective West's inadequate military-industrial base. Headlines claiming 3,350 missiles are on their way to Ukraine belie the likely details of the arms program, with production only having just started and the first 1,000 missiles likely to reach Ukraine over the course of 2 years. So not 1,000 missiles each year, 1,000 missiles over the course of 2 years at best, and the rest over a period of up to 3 years or longer. Even if 3,350 missiles were available today to send to Ukraine, the fact that these are air-launched missiles means the most significant bottleneck for their use on, or I guess over, the battlefield will be combat aircraft and pilots available to deliver the weapons on target. Limitations regarding Ukrainian air power have prevented other air-launched and air-dropped munitions from reaching their full potential on the battlefield, including the British Storm Shadow and French Scalp air-launched cruise missiles with ranges up to 250 kilometers, as well as the aforementioned US JDAM glide bombs and even French-made AASM Hammer glide bombs, which are also powered but with a solid rocket motor, but falling far short of the ERAM's longer range of 240 to 450 kilometers. The Hammer has a range of only 70 kilometers. Ukrainian air power, beyond issues of quantity, also faces significant challenges from active Russian measures to defend against their use, including extensive air defense capabilities targeting both Ukrainian warplanes and the munitions they launch. So Russia is able to shoot down Ukrainian warplanes. They can also intercept the munitions these warplanes are using to try to strike at Russian targets. There are also constant efforts to target Ukrainian military aviation on the ground where they operate from. In other words, Russian missile strikes on Ukrainian air bases, striking at warplanes while they're on the ground, or ground support equipment. The longer range of the ERAM will afford Ukrainian warplanes greater safety while conducting standoff attacks in ways US JDAM and French Hammer munitions cannot. But the low quantities of ERAM missiles and aircraft to deliver them means that, at least in the first 2 to 3 years, only about 1 missile could be launched per day, or more likely, 1 larger scale coordinated attack carried out once a week, every other week, or even more infrequently. In other words, yes, you could probably drop 1 of these a day based on the quantities the US will be sending them to Ukraine, but dropping 1 a day isn't going to achieve anything. They're likely going to be intercepted and not hit anything at all, and the plane firing it could end up shot down as well. And so what Ukraine is almost certainly going to do is fly a large mission with multiple aircraft and try to launch as many of these as possible all at once, all at one section of Russia's air defenses, to try to saturate and overwhelm it to hopefully hit a target. A larger number of ERAMs would be required per strike to saturate Russian air defenses in the hopes that at least some of the munitions would make it to their targets, which is what I just said. Compared to Russia's tempo of airstrikes, missile strikes, ballistic and cruise missiles, as well as long-range drone strikes, the inclusion of ERAMs for Ukraine will make no noticeable difference in terms of the balance of military power on and above the battlefield. And of course, this is what I've been pointing out every single time one of these wonder weapons is unveiled and sent to Ukraine, that it will make no difference, that the current trajectory of the conflict will continue to accelerate in favor of Russia. Let us talk about how this is a battle of attrition and point out the fact that Russia is still winning that battle of attrition. By the end of 2023 alone, Reuters would report Russia had carried out 7,400 missile and 3,700 Garand-2 drone strikes alone. Since then, Russia has drastically increased the production and use of both. That is this article that I have actually referenced many times since it was published at the end of 2023. This was a huge number of missiles and drones. The number of missiles and drones Russia is firing now is only increasing. By 2025, Russia would launch a staggering 6,400 missiles and drones into Ukraine in just a single month, ABC News would report. That is this article here. That is one record-breaking month. That is a tremendous number of drones and missiles. And this is because of what I've been pointing out all along. Russia's military-industrial base is purpose-driven. They don't care about profits. The government told these industrial facilities to increase production, and they have. In the United States, these corporations seek to maximize profit, and they are not going to ramp up production unless they are making more money by doing so. And these two fundamentally different systems are producing two fundamentally different but predictable outcomes. According to Ukrainian media, based on Ukrainian intelligence reports, and that is this article here, the Kiev Independent exclusive, Russia's ballistic missile production up at least 66% over past year, according to Ukrainian intel figures. This was June 2025, just earlier this year. Russia is producing anywhere from 720 to 840 Iskander ballistic missiles. That is per year, 120 to 180 hypersonic Kinzhal missiles, 300 to 360 caliber cruise missiles, 720 to 840 KH-101 cruise missiles, 240 to 360 Iskander-K cruise missiles. The Iskander ground launch system can fire ballistic and cruise missiles. And along with a variety of other missiles, that is all annual production numbers. So the US is talking about sending 1,000 ERAM missiles to Ukraine over the course of 2 years. Each one of these ballistic and cruise missiles that I just listed are 700 to 800. That's getting up there, pretty close to 1,000. If you add all of these up, it's between 2,100 to over 2,580 missiles a year. And then I'm not even counting all the other types of missiles Russia is using, and that obviously doesn't include long-range strike drones, glide bombs, of course. Russia has a tremendous number of glide bombs they're using. And production numbers continue to climb. The opening phase of Russia's special military operation drew from large stockpiles of missiles. Russian missile production is now reaching levels enabling a similar but sustainable scale of missile strikes. So in the beginning of the SMO, Russia had huge stockpiles, and they were just drawing from that and firing. This was well beyond their ability to actually produce these missiles. They just had them stockpiled, and they were using them in huge quantities. The amount of missiles actually being produced now are so great that the number of missiles is reaching the same level that Russia was using in the beginning by drawing from enormous stockpiles, just to give you an idea of how significantly Russia has ramped up missile production. The very nature of the ERAM program represents an admission of and an attempt to overcome the obvious shortcomings of America's military-industrial base and the many doctrines that have up until now shaped it versus the vast and still growing size of Russian military production. The United States realizes that Russia and China can outproduce them, and so now they're looking for clever ways to match or exceed the quantity of weapons Russia and China are producing. And so far, they have not succeeded. For decades, the United States has pursued the role as sole global superpower following the Cold War. This worldview laid out explicitly in Pentagon documents reported on by the New York Times. I've shown this many, many times. This was the plan back in 1992, and it's still the plan today. U.S. strategy plan calls for ensuring no rivals develop, no peer or near-peer adversaries allowed. Russia is not allowed to reemerge. China is not allowed to rise. That is America's foreign policy directive, regardless of who is in the White House and who controls Congress. This policy aimed to perpetuate American primacy through a combination of military might and economic influence. This policy set the stage for decades of U.S. wars of aggression, political interference, and an ever-expanding series of confrontations focused specifically on a re-emerging Russia and a rising China. So a lot of the countries the U.S. has attacked and overthrown were potential partners for both Russia and China. What they're trying to do is isolate Russia and China and then eliminate Russia and China themselves. That is their plan. The narrative of uncontested American military supremacy, the same narrative of American military supremacy that we saw all throughout this conflict in Ukraine, that US armed and trained Ukrainian soldiers will be able to easily overwhelm poorly trained, poorly equipped, poorly motivated Russian soldiers. We still hear analysts even today referring to this myth of American military supremacy. This was carefully maintained through a series of conflicts with significantly weaker nations. The wars in Iraq and the toppling of the Libyan government were held up as proof that American precision and technology were vastly superior. And relative to what Libya or Iraq had, it was. America's military-industrial base worked along two premises: quality over quantity and profit over purpose, based on a belief that expensive precision-guided munitions could achieve with one round what would otherwise require dozens of less profitable conventional munitions. So you have one really expensive precision-guided weapon that makes you much more money when you produce it and sell it to the US government than large quantities of conventional weapons that don't make you as much profit and actually could cost you more to produce them in huge quantities. And the profit margin just isn't there for them. Washington's proxy war with Russia, however, has revealed American weapons, while technologically advanced, are often not produced in sufficient numbers to counter a peer adversary capable of waging a war of attrition. The myth of quality over quantity has unraveled on and over the battlefield in Ukraine. The staggering volume of Russian firepower, ranging from artillery shells to missiles, rockets, drones, and glide bombs, have ground down the US, European trained and armed Ukrainian armed forces over the course of the 3+ year war. A staggering volume of firepower the US and its European client states have so far failed to match, both in terms of quantity, but also quality. Russian precision-guided weapons have turned out to be at least as effective as US weapons, cheaper, and many times more numerous. This emerging paradigm has resulted for a variety of reasons. Chief among them is the very organization of the collective West's arms industry under a for-profit model versus the network of for-purpose state-owned enterprises that Russia's arms industry consists of within a society that likewise prioritizes purpose over profit, which is why in Russia you have free healthcare, because they seek to serve a purpose rather than simply pursue profit, a healthy society. Russia's arms industry produces munitions of quantities and quality required to meet the objectives of the state, whether or not they produce a profit, while the West's arms industry produces munitions of quantities and quality to maximize profit. The fundamental for-profit versus for-purpose mindset extends further beyond just the arms industry alone into areas like education and infrastructure that provide essential inputs for the arms industry itself. So if you have a sick society, you will also have a sick workforce. If you have a subpar education system that is unraveling, you're not going to have properly trained labor to work in your factories, and it goes on and on like that. According to a 2017 Forbes article, let's take a real quick look at that right here. I've shown this many times. Okay, this is from 2017, and the numbers have changed, but the same point still stands. And if you look at this image, countries with the most STEM graduates, this is China, okay, many times more than the United States. This is Russia, has half the population, but almost the same amount of STEM graduates, because it is a priority in Russia, and in the United States, it is not a top priority. So according to a 2017 Forbes article, Russia, despite having a population half the size of the United States, has a comparable number of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics graduates per year. That's what STEM means if you don't know. Meaning that Russia had and still has a larger number of STEM graduates per capita than the US, despite fluctuating numbers since 2017. Russia's close partnership with China and India further enhances its access to industrial inputs produced by even larger pools of highly skilled labor, collectively dwarfing those of the West. The creation of the ERAM program and others like it seek to shift the established paradigm of quality over quantity in terms of military-industrial production. While the ERAM represents a more effective approach, the US and its European client states still fall far short in terms of either quantity or quality, precisely because of the fundamental differences between the collective West's approach to military-industrial production and Russia's This has not been addressed in the West, so they cannot fix this problem. If you cannot address the core problem creating this disparity, then you cannot fix the problem itself. The ERAM and other programs like it seek to narrow the existing gap between Western and Russian military-industrial production as well as China's. However, currently Russia continues to expand its own production as well as invest in contributing factors like education and infrastructure to expand skilled labor and supply chains even further. The ERAM program, therefore, is one part of a wider attempt to pivot from the myth of absolute Western technological supremacy to the reality of attrition warfare, one that the West's for-profit military-industrial model is fundamentally ill-equipped to win. While Washington's political machine continues to wage a fierce and highly effective campaign of information warfare and covert interference far beyond the battlefield, its ability to back these efforts with tangible military power is visibly waning. The ERAM is not a wonder weapon that will change the course of the conflict. It is a belated and likely inadequate response to a strategic reality that Russia and its allies have already established. For the emerging multipolar world, the key to navigating this new era is not to simply match or exceed Western military power, but to continue building a more resilient, purpose-driven industrial and societal foundation, one that is as apt at defending against U.S. interference and influence as it is at outproducing it in terms of artillery shells, missiles, and drones. In America's pursuit of full-spectrum dominance, only full-spectrum defense will prevail. And what I'm saying there is, yes, Russia and China are outproducing the United States. The United States still has a tremendous advantage, a super weapon, if you will, and that is its ability to interfere in targeted countries, to politically capture them, and turn the entire population against its own best interests to serve American interests, often in the form of creating an armed proxy the US then sets against a nation like Russia, which is exactly what it did with Ukraine and also Georgia in 2008. They're also doing this vis-a-vis China. The Philippines is a good example of this. The island province of Taiwan, which is actually part of China, the US has politically captured it and is turning it as a battering ram against the rest of China. And so this is a tremendous danger to the multipolar world. And it's not just these very visible proxies the US creates and unleashes against Russia and China. There's also all of the nations in between the US is still right now interfering in with the National Endowment for Democracy. It is infecting and very slowly and gradually capturing these countries politically. And there will be a tipping point in each one of these countries if this isn't stopped, where they will fall and they will be captured by the United States, and then they will be used against Russia and China. And so you have to look at the big picture. You cannot just look at military industrial production and say Russia and China are going to win. There are other factors that play into this, and there are advantages the United States still has, even if it isn't on the battlefield in terms of military industrial production. We have to keep a close eye on all of this, on the big picture. I will continue covering all of this, the developments militarily in Ukraine and elsewhere, other armed conflicts, as well as the non-military means the US uses to capture and control and maintain its primacy over the globe. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. I publish all of my videos on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Telegram. In the video description below will be all of the links that I referenced in this video, including the NEO article that I wrote. That'll be down there. There are also ways in the video description below where you can help support my work. I do not monetize any of my social media platforms. If ads pop up, feel free to skip them or block them. They're not helping me out at all. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also through Patreon. Again, the links will be in the video description below. To everyone who has been helping out, whether it's a one-time donation, donations month to month, or if you have no resources available, nothing to spare, and you're just helping share my work with others, that is all greatly appreciated. You do not need to apologize to me. I see people apologizing. Just sharing the work alone is a great help, and I greatly appreciate that and all forms of support. So thank you for that, and that is what makes this possible. And as always, thank you for watching.